Americans who lived in Russia, what surprised you about this country? What stereotypes turned out to be false? Not everyone drinks vodka 24/7. Yes, there are quite a few alcoholics, but there are also many hard-working people, as many as in America. And when Russians drink, they don't say, na zdorovi. They say, bud zdorov. I was in Russia and went on dates with Russian girls. I must say they are very beautiful and sweet. But communicating with the locals is quite difficult. You feel like a lost foreigner. It's a pity that Russian is very hard to learn. I tried borscht. It's very tasty. St. Petersburg is an amazing city. I would gladly visit it again. Sochi is also an okay city, but the beaches are, of course, terrible. Studied in Russia for 6 months. Many Russians, living in big cities, are very educated and work a lot. I would even say more than the average Americans. The adult population that grew up in the USSR is even more educated. However, they have many superstitions and somewhat outdated views on gender roles and some aspects of biology. They don't have much money, so they rarely travel outside their homeland. Thus, their understanding of the world is often limited to Russia and nearby regions. Many of them don't strongly support the current government and aren't interested in politics because ordinary people feel powerless in this area. Mostly, they are more focused on their daily lives. Russians love European culture and are happy to interact with Americans. If you are an American living in Russia, you are something new and interesting for them. People are eager to improve their English and gladly communicate with Americans in English because they rarely meet native speakers. While I was in Russia, I was thanked a million times for coming and a million times asked why on earth I was interested in Russia. What surprised me as an American was their universal sense of belonging to Russian history and culture, which they understand at a very high level. Like, I also read some classical works in school, but they don't particularly intersect with my everyday life. I also noticed that Russians are not particularly proud of their country's politics. Plus, it seems they are generally not arrogant and rarely consider themselves successful people. And unlike American individualism, the center of Russian life is their family and surroundings. Their winters aren't that harsh. The lack of smiles on their faces is what really makes this country less warm. Many in this thread are somehow surprised that Russians are good guys. Do people still believe in the stereotypes of evil Russians? I'm an American myself, but I never believed that. Generally, wherever you go, ordinary people will be normal because they are just like us, but those in power. What's surprising about this, if for the last 60 years, in all American movies, Russians have always been portrayed as villains. It turned out that America doesn't really concern them. They either don't care about it or speak positively about it. Wait. Are you saying there are countries where people don't discuss Great America 24/7? Lived in Moscow in 2007 while studying at the university. I can't tell you about all of Russia because it's a giant country with different people and views on life, but I can tell you about Moscow. Overall, our perceptions are not far from reality. Many drink and respect strong leaders, even if their power negatively affects some rights and freedoms of the population. But we are a bit mistaken about all Russians being depressive and repulsive. This is true only in the sense that Russians don't make eye contact on the street, don't smile, and can't just come up and, out of nowhere, for example, pet your dog, which is quite unusual for me because I'm from Texas, and we consider it quite rude not to smile at a passerby. So yes, this public side of gloomy and unfriendly Russians indeed exists. I traveled across Russia by train and spent several days in Moscow. Once in Moldova, a Russian guy helped me fix my motorcycle. Before I left my country, I was told that Russians are like coconuts, and Americans are like peaches. Russians have a hard shell that is difficult to crack. But once you manage it, they open up to you, invite you to their homes, and are very friendly. Americans, on the other hand, are like peaches, friendly on the outside but hard inside. You'll become friends at the first meeting, but when it comes to their personal lives, they will be very cautious with you. The Russian guy who helped me with the motorcycle said that an American would gladly smile and chat with you, but only if you're outside his fence. He won't invite you over. True, I'm really like that. I don't know why. I go to Russia every summer. Today's Russia seems quite Western to me. They have a lot of Western food, fast food, shops, and everything we are used to seeing in the US. And they no longer try to hide anything from visitors. I've been to different parts of Russia, and it's far less well maintained than Moscow and St. Petersburg. During Soviet times, as a tourist, I wouldn't have been able to see all this. Americans don't understand that Russia also has racial issues. Russia is very diverse, just like the USA. In the East, there are people who look like Koreans, and in Central Asia, there are typical descendants of Soviet countries. They also have their own tensions, just like we do here. Here's another point. Despite many Russians liking to drink, not everyone does. I see a clear age divide. People aged 20 to 40 are drinking less and thinking more about their careers. Regarding the notion that Russians don't like Americans, it seemed to me to be quite the opposite. They love our culture and what the American entertainment industry produces. You have no idea how many times a guy named Dima approached me at the university and asked me to explain the lyrics of American rappers. I spent 3 months in Moscow. Before leaving, I went to my pharmacist to stock up on medications. When he found out where I was going, he was surprised and said, "But they'll kidnap you there. Those guys roam the streets with Kalashnikovs." I tried to convince him that it wasn't like that at all and that I would be fine, but he was very skeptical. Ironically, less than a year after I returned, some guys decided to rob his pharmacy and killed him. The criminals were never found. I'm so afraid to find out that not all Russian girls are beauties. No, dude. Russian girls are gorgeous. Russians have absolutely amazing food, and it is much less harmful than American food. It so happened that I have serious stomach problems, and there is little I can eat from American cuisine. When I first moved to Russia, I thought I would have to stick to my strict diet, but it turned out I could eat almost all Russian dishes and feel absolutely fine. I haven't felt as good as I did there in a long time. Sometimes, I seriously consider moving back to Russia just for the food. Most Americans probably don't know that in Russia, alcohol isn't sold after 11 p.m. You can easily get something at a bar or restaurant, but you won't be able to buy beer or wine at a regular store. The idea that Russia is always gloomy and depressing. In late spring, early summer, St. Petersburg looks simply stunning, and the white nights make up for the fact that in December, the sun rises almost at 10 a.m. I've been living here for about 4 years. As for politics, Russians don't idolize Putin, but many of them, especially men, support him. I don't talk about politics often, so there might be reasons I'm unaware of. The information broadcast by American and Russian media is, of course, fundamentally different. Russian television portrays Putin as a strong yet kind and pleasant leader, which contradicts the American view. I also lived in Russia for 2 months, mostly in Moscow. Though I'm not American, I'm Australian. In general, the food there turned out to be much tastier than I expected, cheap and delicious at Taramak. Public transport is much more convenient than in Sydney. The metro is just amazing. The people are much better than I expected. But I don't want to ride in a car with Russians again, confirming the stereotype that Russians are bad drivers. There aren't many hooligans, but they are annoying. Russian apartments aren't that small. It's a pretty normal country, and it's not falling apart as we are often told on TV. But what is really true is that their police are very corrupt and don't hesitate to be rough with people. Also, when people found out I was from Australia and not the USA, they treated me much nicer. I give Russia a 5 out of 7. I first came to Moscow from Northern California in 2013 and decided to stay indefinitely. What can I tell you? Aside from crappy service, the lack of smiles, and the absence of sunlight in winter, I like everything. Russians love American culture. They watch a lot of Hollywood movies. They're starting to get into Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Black Friday. I enjoy explaining our traditions to Russians. And there's this giant McDonald's in Moscow. If I'm not mistaken, it has 27 registers, and there are always lines. As for vodka, young people either don't like it or have bad associations with it, so they drink other beverages. Girls love fruit cocktails and wine, while guys drink whiskey and scotch or don't drink at all. Russians seemed very kind and sincere to me. If you ask someone for help, they'll go out of their way to assist you. One guy fixed my computer, even though I barely knew him, and then, when I told him I wanted to learn SolidWorks, he offered to tutor me via Skype. I once met a guy at a conference who drove me home the same day, even though I lived on the other side of the city. It was totally out of his way. He just spent a few hours of his time on me. I also had a professor at the university who once offered to work with me on a small project. In America, any professor would consider that a waste of time. I noticed that in Russia, teachers seem to take more responsibility for their students' success than in the US. My girlfriend and I taught English in Ufa for 3 years. It turned out that Russians aren't as healthy and robust as people might think. At 173 centimeters tall, I felt quite tall. Russians have many restrictions on alcohol sales. After 10 p.m., you can't buy anything. By the way, I met a lot of Russians who don't drink. And it's definitely not because I lived in a Muslim region. I know many Muslims who actually do drink. You can't drink and drive at all, so if someone visits you and you offer them a beer, they'll likely refuse. Russia isn't as dangerous as people think. During my 18 months in the country, I had no problems. I didn't have any run-ins with the police, and I never had to bribe anyone. That's all I can remember for now. Thank you for watching. Have you visited Russia? What impressed you the most? Share your experience in the comments. We'd love to read about it. And don't forget to check out our other videos.